Mark Rogers TV and SEC Breakdown, taking a look at the Tennessee Volunteers for 2016, and most specifically the schedule as it lays out, games 1 through 12. So an article written by our very own on SEC Breakdown right here, Mike Loveall of Last Word on Sports as well. Mike, interesting read. So I just got done with it in regards to your breakdown, not just to go game by game and try to predict the wins and losses, but at the same time trying to give a narrative to how we got to this point at the Tennessee program under Butch Jones and how you expect the season to play out. Again, not just in terms of wins and losses, but in terms of what may be the challenges psychologically for this team.
Yeah, Mark, I think that's really the story of the season is the psychological aspect of this team. It's really the time is now for Tennessee. Butch Jones has had 3 years of rebuilding the program. He's done a very good job. The talent is in Knoxville. When Butch Jones took over, I don't think a lot of fans across the nation appreciate how little appreciate the talent drain that occurred prior to Butch Jones's arrival in Knoxville. He spent 3 years getting that talent back, particularly depth, particularly getting talent at depth, the second and third string guys that you have to win in the SEC because of injuries and whatnot. But Butch Jones, 3 years of rebuilding. Tennessee fans want to see the results on the field this year. Of course, we've went 2 years in a row with no draftees in the NFL, so we expect to have a large exodus of talented players this year. Still got some talent coming in, but the fans see the future. Losing Jalen Hurd probably after this season, definitely losing Joshua Dobbs, losing a couple key guys on the defense. So the time is really now for this Tennessee program. They really need to win this year. The other reason why it's so imperative to win this year is Butch Jones has brought in all that talent. One of the biggest recruiting pitches is the promise to play immediately. Now he has depth. So you can't really promise those 4- and 5-star players that they can start immediately. Now you have to sell something else on the recruiting trail. And really the only other thing that you can sell to get 4- and 5-star players away from Alabama, away from Ohio State, away from Florida is a chance to compete for championships. So you can either sell kids on two things: the ability to play immediately and maybe get to the league earlier, or the ability or the chance to win championships year in and year out. Butch Jones has to win this year to keep that recruiting momentum going by selling the chance to play for championships this year. Critical point in Butch Jones's tenure at Tennessee this year right here.
Mike, it kind of is a segue what you just stated in regards to what intrigues me about this program. We could slot a number of elite programs starting with Alabama, Ohio State, Oklahoma, and maybe an elite team right now in Stanford, not necessarily an elite program, but we have a pretty good gauge on where they're going to slot over the next couple seasons. We also have a glut of, let's look just at the SEC, Mississippi State and some other schools like that. Auburn has dropped back, but we have a pretty good idea where they're going to slot, and then there's obviously a lot of teams off the radar, both nationally and within the SEC. But for Tennessee, this program's teetering to a certain extent. Not that it's not stable, not that they're not going to be a winning program in the future under Butch Jones, but is it going to be an elite program because of what you just stated? Is it going to be able to break through, or is it going to drop back into a 9-3 mode and have difficulty breaking through against the best teams in the conference and in the nation? So I'll kind of tee you up on a few things that intrigue me about your breakdown of the schedule. So Mike Loveall, Last Word on Sports, catch his schedule analysis for the Tennessee Vols right there. All right, first of all, we've got Appalachian State, which obviously pulled off one of the shockers in the history of college football over Michigan in 2007 as a top 5 Michigan team. So anything's possible, but most likely Tennessee's in good shape there. We look at the Battle of Bristol, and Mike, you're pretty much marking that down as a sure win.
Mark, I don't know if I'm marking it down as a sure win. Virginia Tech's a good team. They're returning 8 offensive starters, 7 on the defense. Now, they do have they're going through a program change. That always causes me concern from a fan perspective. Justin Fuente's coming in. He's going that system is going to be different than what was run under Frank Beamer, even though there's still a couple guys from Beamer's staff in Virginia Tech. But they're returning a lot of experience. You know that defense is probably going to be good. You know the special teams is probably going to be good. That's kind of Virginia Tech's hallmark. But if you look at Virginia Tech, they're a team last year that went 7-6 6-6 in the regular season, but 2 of those losses were at the end of the season in overtime to Duke and North Carolina, 2 bowl teams. So they were literally a couple seconds away from being 8-4 in the regular season and one of the top bowl bids in the ACC. So their record to me is not as indicative of the quality of program that they are. I think Tennessee will handle them. It will be Tennessee's second game. They'll have 10 days in between the first game. But the only thing that concerns me about that game is there's going to be a lot of hype, a lot of it's going to be a circus there in Bristol with 160,000 fans, the largest ever to see a football game. I think Virginia Tech will probably come in under the radar. They'll play Liberty the week before, so there's not a lot of coverage. Tennessee will probably be still at least number 9 or number 10 in most polls. If a team or two struggles the first week, you could see Tennessee jump up to 7 or 8 with a big win over Appalachian State. So Virginia Tech might come in with a little bit of chip on their shoulder, but I think Tennessee will handle that. And I think most importantly, it's going to be a great test for Tennessee emotionally, psychologically, and to prepare for a game before the Florida game. But I do think Tennessee's going to handle it, but I think they will get tested.
Justin Fuente having to decide a starting quarterback. He loses his starter from 2015 in Michael Brewer. The Hokies bring back Isaiah Ford, one of the best receiving threats in college football. And look out for Trayvon McMillan, gained 1,000 yards as a true freshman for Virginia Tech last season. And typically solid and, if not spectacular, especially on special teams for the Hokies. All right, now we move into that Florida game. And you talk about a psychological barrier. There it is, and especially considering what most of these kids had to go through on 4th and 16, and I believe 5 fourth-down conversions in the second half for Florida in the swamp, and just trying to get by a very talented Florida team despite some expected issues on offense.
Yeah, Mark, I break the schedule down into 3 segments. The first 3 games, Appalachian State, Virginia Tech, and Ohio, is kind of the preparation phase or the preparation phase. But those next 4 games, starting with Florida, are the prove it games. That's what I call the prove it block of the schedule. It starts with Florida. The last 2 losses to Florida in this series have just been absolutely gut punches for Tennessee fans. Both games they should have won. Both games they let go in the 4th quarter, particularly last year. Just absolute gut punch for the fans. This is by far the most important game of the schedule. It is by far the most important game for Tennessee to come out and play well on. It will be in Knoxville, which is a benefit. 9 of the 12 games this year are in the state of Tennessee. So it'll be in Knoxville. But Tennessee just absolutely must win this game. If they don't win this game, what you talked about, that ability for Tennessee to get back to the elite level, everything in that program, everybody's going to be thinking, oh, here we go again. Another 8-4, 9-3 season that's going to be a disappointment. This game, simply for the psychological health, the mental health of this entire program, from the players to the coaches, to the support staff, to the vendors, to the pom-pom shakers, to the band members, to the guys selling programs outside the stadium. Everyone will be emotionally invested in this game. By far the most important game of the season. Tennessee must prepare for it. They must come out. They must execute, and they've got to win this game if they're going to get back to that elite level that you talked about earlier.
And Mike, you would think they would have the decided advantage in regards to offensive fireworks, where Florida's a bit limited at this point in the development under Jim McElwain, and obviously at the quarterback position where you've got a veteran coming back versus Luke Del Rio, and of course, home field advantage. But that hasn't proven to be the case in recent years in this rivalry. So I asked you about the Virginia Tech automatic status of a win there. You're certainly not counting it that way. My next question is, you've got Florida, you got Georgia, and this is where you see the Vols breaking through that initial week of a ridiculously difficult 4-game stretch, but then they've got to come back the next week and take on another big rival in Georgia.
Yeah, just to add on to the Florida game, I think Tennessee's going to win that game because they match up well. Florida's weaknesses on offense are a new quarterback and a running game, which pairs up well with Tennessee's defensive strength. And then Florida's strength on defense, I think, is going to be the corners and the secondary. Of course, Tennessee's weakness is the vertical passing game. So I think the home field advantage, the mental preparation, the confidence in Knoxville, and the strengths and weaknesses match up on the field. I think Tennessee is going to break through with Florida. But then they go to Georgia, and just like you talked about, this is the classic trap game for any for any program. If they win against Florida, they break that streak. The goalposts are coming down in Knoxville. We already know that. Everybody will be sky high for ending the streak for starting 4-0. They'll probably be top 7, top 8 at that point if they beat Virginia Tech and they beat Florida. So they're going to have a hard time getting back into that grinding mode, getting back into the preparation. If they lose, just like I talked about earlier, they're going to be thinking to themselves, "Oh, here we go again. Another disappointing 8-4, 9-3 season." So no matter what happens with the Florida game, that Georgia game is going to be incredibly hard to prepare for mentally, as well as game plan wise execution. That those win or lose, the Sunday film study and the Monday, Tuesday practices are going to be awfully hard for the coaches to get that team ready. It's really going to show us. The Georgia game is really going to show us how disciplined this team is, both physically on the field, because that Georgia running game is going to wear you down, and mentally as far as how they get ready for the program. As far as how they get ready for the game from a mental and emotional standpoint, regardless of how the Florida game turns out.
Yeah, so we see when the Gators come to town how resilient the Vols are, or mentally tough. Let's go with that phrase. And then especially if they get behind in that game. And then regardless of what happens, I can see it playing out both ways. As you state, it's a high of highs. If you finally break the barrier, then you got to get up the next week, 7 days later, or you've got to pick yourself up the mat and get ready for the Georgia Bulldogs. So difficult assignment there. Regardless, you've got the Bulldogs breaking through with a 3-point win there. The stretch continues for the game against Texas A&M. On the road at Kyle Field, the Aggies extremely talented, much like Tennessee, high in the recruiting rankings in recent years, haven't necessarily produced much on the field, winning seasons, but not big winning seasons. Trevor Knight in from Oklahoma. You can certainly comment on that, but I want to get to the Alabama game as well, because you've got a Tennessee roster that's come to fruition, is ready to explode against the stalwarts of the SEC and really college football in Alabama.
Yeah, I think the Texas A&M game is going to be one of those games Tennessee's going to just want to get in there, get a win, and get out of town. I think it's one of those games where they're going to go in, and Texas A&M will probably throw Tennessee off its game a little bit. A couple of big plays. Special teams might have a factor there. The league's 2 best return men by far, hands down, are in Tennessee and Texas A&M. So I think Tennessee's going to pull that one out, but I think it's going to be ugly. I don't think it's going to be the way that the coaches plan it, and I think they're going to be happy to get back to Knoxville to win. So then they're going to turn their attention to Alabama. Alabama's at home again, so that plays to our strength. But it's the 4th game out of that brutal 4-game stretch: Florida, Georgia, A&M, and Alabama. Plus, it's coming off a road game in College Station. I tell you, I think Tennessee has the talent. I think Tennessee showed last year they have the talent to hang with Alabama, carrying the lead into the 4th quarter. If people remember 2 years ago, Tennessee lost to Alabama 34-20, but they scored 21 points in the first 3 drives. After Josh Dobbs comes in, it was a pretty even game, even to late into the second half. So I think Tennessee has the talent with Jalen Hurd and Alvin Kamara, a good switch up to test that Alabama defense. And if Joshua Dobbs can develop any sort of vertical passing game, they will actually challenge Alabama. Here's the thing about Alabama, though. Nick Saban has proven year in and year out for the past 6-7 years that he has the ability to reload. There is no rebuilding Alabama. And for anybody to discount Alabama's ability to put championship level talent out on the field every year for every game is a mistake. So until Tennessee can prove to me that they can beat Alabama, you got to think Alabama is going to be the favorite in that game.
Yeah, it's a fierce rivalry, and as you mentioned, the blowouts have been sprinkled in there, but despite Tennessee being down in recent years, they've certainly had their shots at Alabama and in taking down some of the best teams in college football over the last decade. Of course, the blocked field goal in Tuscaloosa a few years ago comes to mind, and last year's game, Derrick Henry basically drove the ball down the field in the last few minutes, but Tennessee had, I believe, a 2-point lead before that, and we're in great shape, and then Bama's defense put the clamps on Dobbs and company with just a tremendous pass rush in the closing seconds. All right, the closing stretch, regardless of the mentality of this team, it's just too good to drop any of these games down the closing stretch. You know, much like last year when you mentioned in the article they're 2-3. A little bit later they've got 4 losses, but then they just close it out against the weaker teams in the Eastern Division, plus a Tennessee Tech team. My big question for you, Mike, is obviously The one that stares me right in the face is Tennessee loses to Georgia. Therefore, Georgia's got the 1-game lead plus the tiebreaker. So you're looking at the Bulldogs losing, obviously, 2 other SEC games, or losing 3 SEC games because the Vols also lose to Alabama, but turn out and win the SEC East.
Yeah, Mark, I think Georgia's going to have an up and down year. I think what's going to hurt Georgia most is the inexperience at quarterback and depth. Those running games, the teams who rely heavily on the running game, it's a very physically imposing season. If you look at Georgia last year, their final stretch of 5 games, they got away with wins, but they were very close games. Very uninspired effort against Missouri the week after dropping the game to Tennessee. 9-point performance there. Very uninspired performance against Florida the week later. They look solid against Kentucky, but then against Auburn, of course, Georgia Southern took them to overtime, and then a 13-point performance by the offense against Georgia Tech. So I think Georgia's a team that might not close well. They have to travel to Missouri. They also get Florida and then Auburn. I think Auburn will be better. I think Georgia has a chance to win against Tennessee, but I think they're going to falter later in the season. And I'm looking at those 3 games at Mississippi, Florida possibly because of Florida's defensive strength against against Georgia's offensive weaknesses, and then Auburn, Auburn's a team I think is going to have a couple of really good games and a couple of really bad games. Later in the season is the Deep South's oldest rivalry, Auburn-Georgia. So I think Auburn might have might have their systems and processes in place. They might be clicking a little bit better later in the season than they do in the early season.
I don't have the schedule in front of me, Mike, but I believe Georgia has a date against Ole Miss as well. So
They do. They play Mississippi the week before Tennessee, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, that I'm going to mark that as kind of a 60-40 odds in the Rebels' favor there over Georgia. So that's I'm not going to say a probable loss, but that's somewhat of a toss-up game against Ole Miss. Here's my next question for you, Mike. If there's an unexpected loss out there for Tennessee, we would expect the Alabama loss, to a lesser degree Georgia, Florida. Is there an unexpected loss out there possibly for Tennessee?
I think the first unexpected loss would be Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech, again, they're returning a lot of starters. They're going to be flying under the radar. Nobody has them in the top 25. They're not getting any votes, but they're returning almost as many starters as Tennessee. Fuente's proven that he's a good coach. He won at Memphis. The only question is, can he get his system in place in time for the second game of the season? And of course, they have the quarterback, a new starting quarterback. I'm a guy that kind of overvalues quarterbacks. 6 of the last 7 championship-winning quarterbacks have been first-year starters. I believe 2 of those were true freshmen as well. So I'm beginning to think that I overvalue quarterbacks. We'll see. Plus, you talked about Virginia Tech's got a lot of good talent in that backfield with their running back, McMillan, I believe is his name. The other possible surprise loss, I think would be South Carolina. Tennessee's had their number, but again, South Carolina's a team that's going through transition. They might surprise some people this year. It seems that rivalry, the Tennessee-South Carolina rivalry, is one, if you can call it a rivalry. The matchup in the last decade has been one where the team that's kind of going through the hardest time somehow seems to beat the other team when they're playing well. Tennessee's had South Carolina's number since Spurrier has been there. He kind of got that program up to the East contending for the championship every year, but Tennessee has had a lot of success against them in Spurrier's years. If there's a surprise loss, I think probably Virginia Tech number 1, South Carolina number 2. I wouldn't consider any of that 4-game stretch a surprise loss. Florida, Georgia, A&M, Alabama. I would consider I would consider Virginia Tech or South Carolina a surprise loss.
So here's the deal, folks. You join Mike Loveall and myself, also Chad Niebling and David Waters on SEC Breakdown. Depending on where you're watching this or listening to this on a podcast, we're available on YouTube channel, SEC Breakdown, also a Twitter account, and also Facebook. Join us there for tons of content to set you up for your SEC football season coming up in less than 2 weeks. In addition, Mike Loveall right there. Join him on Last Word on Sports. He writes much more than the run-of-the-mill previews and analysis that you're going to see all over the internet. You're going to see some more in-depth breakdowns for the serious hardcore football fans. So, Mike, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Mark. Always a pleasure.